And hey there, it's me, R.C. Mulhare, back again with another chapter of these chilling bedtime stories. It's going to be a long one, so without further ado, Chapter 4. The next day, the kitchen was already a beehive of activity when Fiona arose, more than a typical morning would require. Clearly, the master had something planned. Later, when she entered Avril's room, she found the master's wife sitting in her dressing gown, her lady's maid putting up her hair. Asenath, you are excused for the moment, Avril said. Miss Canine, I want to speak to you alone for a moment. The lady's maid left the room. Avril turned in her chair toward Fiona. I want to apologize for my husband's tone last night. He is a firm man who wishes to maintain a well-ordered house, and he has a space which he desires to remain untouched. But I could see he upset you. Begging your pardon, ma'am, but his order was peculiar. It puzzled me, and I'd initially ignored it. But there's no need for you to apologize for him, Fiona replied. He has specified that there are some places in the house that you are to focus on today. The dining room furniture wants polishing. He is hosting a dinner party for his lodge this evening, Avril said. Can you have it finished before 4 this afternoon? Very likely, ma'am, but wouldn't a lodge meet in a lodge? Fiona asked. Avril chuckled gently. There are a small fraternity which, according to my husband, have met here since he took charge of leading it, as they met in his father's house at Arkham before him. I see. I hope that I've not crossed the line. Not in the least. It puzzles me as well. He has never allowed me to meet his guests, much less dine with them, she replied. I suppose the men must have their space, as women need theirs, Fiona said. Once she had tidied her lady's chamber, Fiona dusted and swept the dining room thoroughly and polished the table and chairs, as well as the sideboard with its dark brown wood, intricate carved with fern leaves and pine branches. She could see her face reflected in the uncarved surfaces of the sideboard when the footman entered carrying a fresh set of linens, all in violet with black and gold embroidery. Is this a funeral luncheon? Fiona asked innocently. No, Mrs. Canine. These linens have belonged to Mr. Montague's family for generations. They have used them for a special gathering since Lord Montague's generation in the 1600s, before Cromwell's men ran him from Great Britain, Barrows, the butler, said, giving her a look as if to say, Go on your way, attend to your other duties. The kitchen still hummed with activity, and according to Sharkey, the servants' dinner was delayed later that evening, as the kitchen staff had their hands full preparing the courses for the dinner party. At nightfall, several carriages, many of them black and enclosed, rolled past the windows on the ground floor and into the stable yard well behind the house. Once emptied of their passengers, the coachman entering the kitchen for the dinner that the staff would provide. It was not until well past midnight and the guests had vanished from the dining room that Fiona, along with the rest of the lower servants, were at last allowed to go to bed. The scullery maid required an extra pair of hands, and one of the kitchen boys, the quiet one who wasn't Sharkey, had gone missing. When she put her head to her pillow in the darkness, despite her utter exhaustion, she could not drop off to sleep. From beyond the wall of her room came voices chanting in a language that sounded neither like English nor Latin, and certainly not like Gaelic, but a guttural sputtering tongue, strange vibrations like a pipe organ note too deep to be heard with the ear, and felt instead through the chest, hummed in the air. The floor, the very walls, making it nigh impossible to sleep, no matter how far she thrust her head into the pillows, till well on toward the blackest hour of the night, what Aunt Bridget had called the devil's hour, when it finally stopped. Even then she had to rise early to see to her usual work, even though the folk above the stairs still lay sleeping. She let herself into Avril's chamber, discovering the lady of the house already sitting by the window in the wan September daylight, clad in her dressing gown. She started a bit at the sight of Fiona. Oh, Miss Canine, I wasn't expecting you so early after last night. I can come back if you'd rather I did, Fiona said. No, I wouldn't want to keep you from your work, but if you'd rather come back later, I'd understand, Avril said. You look as if you've been inconvenienced enough. Your eyes look tired. Indeed they are, ma'am, Fiona said, kneeling to shovel the ashes from the hearth. You can speak about it if you like. Fiona sat back on her heels, looking to her employer, but from the look in the younger woman's eyes, she needed the diversion which the chat could afford. 'Twas the chanting, ma'am, coming from the other side of the wall in my room below stairs. Ah, yes, Mr. Montague and the brethren of his law held their exercises last night, Avril said. They hold them at the solstices and equinoxes and the quarters in between. There shan't be another to disturb you for some weeks from now. That should give us all time to recover, Fiona said, set back to her work. As she emptied the chamber pots into the privy, she happened to glance into it. Something stuck up from the stinking depths, something resembling a beef bone, but shorter and smaller. Above stairs must have had mutton at their dinner, but she'd never seen the kitchen offal tossed into the privy. Still, it was the way of a house yet new to her. She suspected the source of those bones when the servants gathered at 11 for their first meal of the day. The other kitchen boy, the quieter one, who wasn't Sharky, was still nowhere to be seen. One part of her mind wanted to think the cook or Mrs. Hawker had dismissed that one for deserting the kitchen when they needed him most. But the bones in the privy would have been about the proper size for the arm bones of a young lad. Later, as Fiona returned below stairs and passing by the door to the locked chamber, she noted in the dust on the steps the tracks of several different pairs of elegantly shod feet. That would explain the chanting and the reasons why he wanted the steps left unswept, the better to keep stock of who came and went from the chamber. The following day, she found Avril sitting up as she had so many mornings. "You would do almost anything that your employers request, wouldn't you, Fiona?" she asked. "Within reason, I would, ma'am," Fiona replied. "You wish to know what goes on in that locked chamber, don't you?" she asked. "If you don't mind my asking, ma'am, why are you asking this of me? Your room abuts that locked chamber, and I think you'd like to know the reason for the disturbance that kept you awake. I'll add an extra 50 cents to your pay this week." She could use the extra money to send to her niece's family, and she appreciated a solution to this mystery. "As you wish, ma'am. Oh, please call me Avril. So familiar with the likes of me? You seem lonely, and I thought you could use some companionship. But why me? Why not your lady's maid? She's Montague's half-sister, begotten by his father on one of the family's maids. If she knew, she would prodle it to her half-brother, caping it in the family. How much he cares for her," Fiona drawled, rolling her eyes. Avril managed to laugh. "This is why I like you, Fiona. You aren't afraid to speak your mind." "At least when I know it won't hurt me prospects," she replied. "And how are we to achieve this?" "I'll purloin the key from his ring," Avril replied. "Dare I ask how you will do that?" "A wife always has ways to divert her husband," her employer said, but something in Avril's eyes suggested she did not completely relish this. Well into the night, Fiona awakened to someone scratching at her door. She rose, pulling her dress on over her night shift, and opened her door. Avril stood in the hallway, a shawl around her shoulders and a lamp in one hand, the key in the other, her hair in disarray, her dressing gown neatly wrapped about her form. "Mr. Montague sleeps deeply tonight," she said. Fiona took the lamp and followed her along the hallway to the locked door. Once at the door, Avril fitted the key to the lock and turned it. The latch refused to lift on her first try, till she pressed it inward and lifted it, and the door disengaged. The door swung inward, hinges creaking with a deep, low groan. Fiona held her breath, keeping her ears to listen for footsteps approaching, expecting to see Barrows's cadaverous face and form manifesting at the mouth of the hallway. But no one approached. Avril stepped into the room, Fiona trailing her, bringing the light. They entered a lowering room hung with dusty red hangings that masked the walls, suggesting drooping foliage on willow trees. A thin layer of dust covered the floors, itself marked out in black and white tessellated marble tiles, footprints showing in the dust, along with marks suggested the trailing edges of long robes brushing the floor as the devotees paced the room, moving in the rounds of their rites. Against the rear wall, amid red violet hangings, hung a large mirror in an odd shape, not triangular, not square, not round, but with odd edges and curves, the surface lit with an odd light, its colors not of this world. As they drew closer, they noted the frame surrounding it, like a wreath of driftwood entwined with the tendrils of a peculiar cephalopod, all rotten bronze. Looking up at it up close, they discovered it was more a window than a mirror, or some commingling of the two. Within the smooth surface, they saw a dim reflection of the room. They could see their own faces dimly, but more clearly see shapes that moved within or behind the glass. Creatures sinuous and formless, taking the appearance of undersea beasts Fiona had seen only in illustrated papers, barely like the fish and things that her brother Declan had caught in his nets. "What is this? How is this possible?" Avril reached out to touch the glass. Eyes and mouths rose to the surface of the thing's substance, goggling at them. Fiona pulled Avril's hand away a moment before she made contact with the glass. A creature on the other side lashed a tendril at them, pressing a face or something like one to the pane. "St. Michael the Archangel, defend us! What are those beasts?" Fiona cried. "I don't know. Why does he have this mirror? What are these creatures?" Avril reached to Fiona, clasping her maid's free arm. Fiona drew her back to the steps, back into the hallway. She took the key from Avril's nerveless hand and locked the door behind them. She had led Avril to the kitchen, setting the lamp on a table and guiding her employer to a chair before stoking the stove and making a pot of tea for Avril. "Why would he keep something so strange? I can see him keeping it from me, but why host such a thing in our house?" Avril said at length, finding her voice and drawing it out of the shadows that clearly flooded her mind. Fiona set a mug before her, putting a handful of loose-leaf tea into a small strainer and pouring the hot water through it, letting it steep before she pushed it toward Avril. "It's strong, but you'll need it. The younger woman picked it up, holding it to warm herself. You don't seem frightened by that, Avril noted. I've seen plenty of dark things in my time. I've watched my sister fade with hunger as she made sure her children ate. I've buried my parents and set up a stone for a friend lost at sea. I've crossed the sea in the belly of a boat, with no light and precious little air for weeks. My first weeks in the New World I spent in quarantine in the poorhouse hospital in East Monoxet, after several on the ship took ill of typhus. With a dark laugh, she added, My elder brother was a fisherman in Galway Bay. I saw plenty of strange things that he dredged up in his nets. Nothing like those creatures, but not entirely unlike them, neither. I thought I'd had trouble in my life, Avril said. If you don't mind my asking, I wouldn't mind listening if you told me more about yourself, Fiona said. Not at all. Not that there's much to tell, Avril said. I was born to Sarah and Micah Jaquith of the Billerica Jaquiths. My father built up the family fortune in renting grazing land to the local farmers. When I was 10, I lost my mother shortly after my youngest sister was born. My father died of a fever about 3 years later and left the land and the fortune to my eldest brother Japheth, who was canny enough to invest some of the family fortune in the mills here in Monoxet. That was how I met Quentin and how he became fond of me. I think it turned my head a little having an older and successful man showing me such attentions. Being closer to the land, that makes a body closer to the folk around them. But you love him? Fiona asked, concerned. He is a hard man to love, but he is kind to me, Avril replied. Fiona detected an unspoken kind at times. He dazzled me, I suppose. We had money enough that my sister and I could easily afford a new silk dress apiece at Easter, and we had servants taking care of the household, usually poorer relatives on my mother's side of the family when they needed work. But I don't have to tell you Quentin has wealth, true wealth, that his family brought to this country. Dare I ask how his clan made their coin? They were merchants in the Far East trade. Someone joked that everything the men of their family put their hand to turned to gold, Avril said, but something in those words suggested that she wondered how they came to that success. Were they merely lucky in their labors, or did their success have root in the spells that they cast, the deals that they made with the darkness? Come now, drink your tea, and then let me take you back upstairs to himself. Avril sipped at the bitter stuff till she finished it, then let Fiona guide her back to her room. It would seem curiosity killed the cat. It might need to know what my husband had locked in that room. But satisfaction might bring back your nerve. That and a good night's sleep. Fiona opened the door to Avril's chamber and guided her inside. In the bedroom, Mr. Montague lay sprawled on the bed asleep. Fiona averted her gaze as Avril bade her good night and retreated into the room. Whew. Yes. The master of the house is the master of something weird and eldritch. This story was inspired by an unused idea left by the master of weird and eldritch fiction himself, Mr. H.P. Lovecraft, and it may not be quite entirely what he suggested in that unused idea, but that's where the inspiration led me, and that's what I wrote. So, but things are going to get more dark and more weird in due time, so I'll let you lot sleep on that. So, till tomorrow night, you folks keep it spooky.